I, as somebody, in my late 30s when I got sober, didn't really consider the possibility that it could kill me, even though I knew other people who had died from alcoholism and not from other drugs. But I think I didn't really process that it could happen to me because I still felt like I was invulnerable.
Mm.
And so, yeah, so there's always a lower bottom, and ultimately that bottom is death.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy, a Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison.
Well, greetings, compadres. Welcome back to Eternally Amy. And here's what's cool. We've been doing this boozeless book club, and I love when I get to interview authors of some of the books that we've read. And today is one of those days. So my guest today is Erica C. Barnett, and she is a journalist. She's a veteran of all things that have to do with writing and publishing, and she lives here in Seattle, so a local friend, which is really exciting. So she's the author of the book I think a lot of you read for the Boozeless Book Club, Quitter, okay? Quitter, Quitter, a memoir of drinking, relapse, and recovery. Okay, so if you didn't read it, rewind to go back to that episode after you do read it, and you can hear how much we loved it, because I have to tell you, well, first of all, Erica, welcome, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled to have you on. And I think that for my listeners today, I just want to say, as we get to spend this time talking with Erica, I know you'll just be touched by her authenticity. I really felt that come through so strongly in your memoir. And so, Erica, I'm pumped to have you on. And I would just love to start by giving you the floor and kind of just letting you unpack however much or however little you would like to about your sobriety story.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here. And yeah, I will give you the relatively short version. I am somebody who was sort of an overachiever, which I'm sure a lot of people who are sober can relate to. I went all through school and was not really a drinker. I talk in my book a little bit about, I was into drugs in high school, but was very ambitious and very driven. And I did not drink in college, and I really didn't start drinking until my 30s. I drank in my 20s, but problematically really happened kind of in my 30s, somewhat mid-career. I was working for newspapers, alternative weekly newspapers, and in a very heavy drinking kind of environment. It just started to take its toll when I was in my maybe early 30s or so. And I'm 46 now, and I have next month, God willing, I will have 9 years of sobriety.
Congrats.
Um, Thank you. So I'm a little removed from all this, at this point. But my story, is probably a little more extreme, I think, than a lot of people have experienced. I sort of went from, being a social drinker, casual drinker, to being a raging alcoholic very, very quickly, and spent about 10 years sort of in the trenches of deep alcoholism. the last few years, it really started to interfere with my ability to do my job, maintain relationships, and even sort of maintain things like my housing. And I, eventually lost my job. And as I described in the book, it happened. And, I've been to a lot of AA meetings. So I'm saying that as preface to the fact that I can laugh about this now. But I got fired after, for a lot of reasons. But the immediate precipitating thing was that I showed up a couple days in a row, passed out in the bathroom, and had to be sort of rescued by people at work who didn't have, any insight into what was going on. And, it was probably quite traumatic for them. And so I lost my job, didn't get sober, had sort of leading up to this, gone into, hospitals, detoxes, all the stuff over and over again. And went to rehab a couple times, and it didn't take, so to speak. And then, one day, as happens, I think a lot with people, I just woke up and I realized I was done. And it wasn't because I lost my job. It wasn't because I, had hit a rock bottom because, I think I hit many rock bottoms. I think there were things that happened before I got fired that were quite a bit more harrowing and life-threatening. I mean, I would do stuff like get into cars with random people. I, hitchhiked from a dangerous intersection to my home at one point at 3 a.m. with a guy, um, who turned out to be kind of an angel and, thank God. But there was lots of stuff that could have been a rock bottom. But what actually happened was I woke up and I said, today's the day. And I went out and I bought my bottle of wine for the day and I drank it. And while I was doing that, I called a detox and I got in. I had no money at this point. My checking account was overdrawn, had no credit on my credit cards. So I wrote a post-dated check to a cabbie and convinced him to take me to detox because at this point I had no friends left who were willing to spend 1 second doing anything like this because they'd seen it all before and just didn't trust or believe me anymore. And, perhaps rightfully so. So I went to detox, got out 5 days later, and something had changed. And it was, the sort of experts in addiction talk about the internal will that you get. You have to have this internal motivation to get into recovery, whatever that looks like for you. And I had that internal motivation, almost outside of my own will. It just came. And after that, I went to meetings and things, and I stayed sober, and I, didn't drink. I actually joined AA and got a sponsor and went through the steps and did all the things I was sort of suggested to do. And I think that, a combination of all the things I had tried before, meditation, psychotherapy, going to all those detoxes and rehabs and learning what I could there, just all kind of coalesced. And I was, and then there's just kind of like the miracle aspect of it where it's like, I don't know why this happened, but it happened on that day in February of 2015, and I haven't had a drink since. And, in sobriety, I mean, what was kind of amazing for me is, a lot of people talk about how things get different. They don't necessarily get better. Things, I was very fortunate. Things immediately got a lot better for me. And, I lost weight, I got my health back, and I got a job and, and have come to see losing that job, which was, from a company that I had co-founded, ended up being a blessing, very much in disguise. And now I have sort of resuscitated that company, and I have a website, a web presence, a website that where I report on local news, and it's very successful. And I was able to do that kind of independently. And I don't think I could be here without having gone through all of that. So I said I was going to keep it short. I realized that I then proceeded to keep it very long. But anyway, that is sort of the summary of my sobriety story, which is, still ongoing.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. One thing that I remember distinctly reading about in your book that was just so moving for me, was because I came up through the 12-step family as well, the 12-step model or method, and I still consider myself a 12-step member. However, I love that there are all kinds of different ways of getting and staying sober. I think to me, when people share, the different ways that it happens, because it's such an unorthodox path to recovery, even though many of us who are sober and in recovery share a lot of the same threads throughout our lives, right? And so one thing that I love that you said, and I might mess this up, but it was the general idea of this quote was that there is no such thing as rock bottom because you can always get lower, or something to that effect. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, because I loved that, because it's so true. I think we get stuck in these patterns of like, oh, okay, I've been sober now for like 4 days. Things are looking up. I'm physically feeling a little better, whatever. And then before we know it, we're back to square one. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and that's basically the quote. You nailed it. I mean,
Okay.
I think that, I mean, that certainly happened for me. As I mentioned, I went to detox a zillion times, right? And hospitals and, and all these sort of halfway measures kind of solutions. And I always thought, well, things could get worse, or I'm feeling better and I mean, there's that lie we tell ourselves about that first drink, because I used to control it. So why couldn't I control it again? And I told myself that lie for a really, really long time. And, for me, like if you were to sort of look at me, at my external situation at the time, you might say, yeah, that's a rock bottom. Like I lost my job. I had the eviction notice on the door. I had my, I have like loving parents, which I'm very lucky for, but they were like absolutely not interested in helping me anymore, because they thought that rehab should have fixed me the first time, right? And so I mean I was headed, and I think I didn't fully appreciate this until much later, but I was headed towards death. And obviously that is the ultimate rock bottom. And I think that, one thing that alcoholics tell ourselves sometimes, or that, we're told by sort of society and culture, is that, we're sort of using a less dangerous drug than other drugs. And I think that as somebody, in my late 30s when I got sober, didn't really consider the possibility that it could kill me, even though I knew other people who had died from alcoholism, and not from other drugs. But I think I didn't really process that it could happen to me because I still felt like I was invulnerable. And so, yeah, so there's always a lower bottom, and ultimately that bottom is death.
Mm-hmm. I love this topic so much because it does make me feel, sort of, I, like you, it's been a while since I felt like drinking was a solution for my life, right? So, I'm going on 13 years in April, and I distinctly remember thinking like, there's no way I can spend a life without alcohol. I couldn't imagine it in any way. And I know, over time, I have picked up so many tools just by talking to other people. And what I really appreciated in Quitter was that you so beautifully described the desperation factor of when you're caught up in the web of alcoholism. And one of the ways that you did that so beautifully was when you were talking about the relationships in your life. And without giving a lot of the book away, do you think maybe high level you could speak on that? Because, what's coming to mind for me is like, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous on page 52, it talks about, we're having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't tell anymore the true from the false. We didn't know. And I certainly had that. I mean, I was burning through people like
Mhm.
nobody's business, like Kleenex when you have a cold, And so I was just wondering if you could kind of speak to that identification process of how you might have been like, yeah, this really isn't like bringing me the most joy in my life.
Yeah, I mean, what was really interesting about the relationships that I had when I was drinking, I mean, exactly like you said, I mean, I did burn through people. But at the same time, I was in relationships with people that I would not be in relationships with sober. I mean, literally, like things that people that I sort of look back on, I'm like, why did I give that person the time of day? And often it was because, it was a drinking buddy or a drinking boyfriend. I talk a lot about in the book about one boyfriend in particular who I stayed with for a long time and was very dependent on in a lot of ways. And we had an incredibly toxic relationship. And I look back on it now and I just am sort of baffled by, many, many aspects of it. And so, one thing now is that the relationships that I had that were sort of genuine and real that I was in the process of destroying have all come back. And the ones that were, alcohol driven or, not sincere in some other way, people that I was using because I thought that they wouldn't judge me as harshly as people who really know me. Those have all completely ended. I mean, there are people that I stopped talking to when I got sober the first time, which I mean, truly was years ago. I mean, I've relapsed over and over again. I just never talked to them again. And so you really do learn to sort the true from the fake in sobriety. And what's great about those relationships that were true relationships, and I'm not a person with a ton of friends. I don't have like a huge group of people around me, but what I do have is very, very close long-term relationships with people. And those are, I mean, infinitely better now. I mean, it's just a night and day. I can't even compare, what it was like when I was lying and faking and trying to sort of shortchange those relationships to what it's like now. And, I talk about my best friend Josh in the book, and the book is dedicated to him. And that's an example of a relationship that is just so much profoundly improved now that, I am honest with him and able to be like a complete person in a way that I wasn't before.
Such a gift. That's such an incredible gift to yourself first and foremost, and to him and to those around you. And um, I love that so much about recovery is we get to actually discover who we are, based on, oh, I had no idea that person existed. I know for me, I never felt growing up, really strong inside of myself. I just kind of looked around to see what everybody else was doing and then tried to kind of adjust the temperature of myself to meet that. And I never really knew who I was. And so, um, yeah, I love that you shared that because I can't give that version of myself when I'm drinking. I don't know that person anymore.
Yeah, same. And that's such a good way to put it, adjusting the temperature of yourself to other people. Like that is exactly spot on what I did from like, from way before I started really drinking, my teenage years to I would say to the point when I got sober or after that point when I started being sort of comfortable. I mean, we always talk about not being comfortable in our own skin. And what's really amazing since, in these 9 years is that I mean, I wouldn't say I'm perfectly comfortable in my own skin at all times, but I know who I am now.
Mm.
And I feel so much more comfortable like talking to strangers. I mean, I tend to be, even though I'm a journalist, like I'm a shy person. And I feel comfortable asserting myself in ways that I never did before, when I would just kind of try to get along with people or mirror them.
Mhm.
Um, and so yeah, I mean it is like I found sides of myself that I didn't know existed.
I love that. I love it. And another thing that I was thinking about as you were talking was I was thinking about relapse. And so for me, I went to treatment against my will, and and then I got out of treatment and I relapsed immediately. And then 2 weeks later, I was back in treatment. And so um, at that point, I knew I had to try. I didn't want to be done, but I knew I had to try. Like it wasn't working for me to reincorporate drinking normally into my life, if you will. So I love that you were so emotionally vulnerable about relapse. I think relapse is such a big, it's like a scary concept that people fear. They just, kind of like, well, I messed up, I relapsed, and so I'll never get sober, and it's like people are quick to stop trying. So what I
Mhm.
loved about Quitter was that you kept going, and you just, after a relapse, you would find your way back to trying again. And I think that that's such a beautiful, it was just a beautiful and moving picture to me, because I don't know, a lot of times in my life, I'm like, like losing weight or whatever. I'm like, I don't know, that didn't work, and that's
Yeah.
big for me. And so I was wondering if you might be able to kind of speak to that journey of relapse. I mean, specifically, I love that you woke up one day and you were like, yeah, I'm done. Like,
Hmm.
I can't do this anymore. Do you feel like a bunch of different factors kind of brought you to that point? Or do you feel like it was just kind of the universe telling you, that's it, you don't have to fight this anymore, you're just gonna turn the page?
I felt it was really just such a weird thing. I mean, I don't want to say it was the universe because I actually do think it was a bunch of factors, but the way it felt was like it's not even just that I was giving in and I was willing to try. It was because I had been willing to try before. I had just been, I think, unable. It was just like I can stop. Like I have the capability to do this now. And I do think it was a lot of things. It was seeing people um, you know, both, go through bad experiences like mine, relapsing over and over and ultimately getting sober. And I think that's one thing that AA is really good for, or any kind of support group meetings. You see other people's experiences, and eventually you start to see your own experiences and other people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
So that was helpful. I was doing a lot of different things, including going to two different, very different treatment centers. And, the first treatment center taught me a lot of tools that I think were ultimately pretty useful. They also taught me a lot of bad things that I think are not useful, that were around, blaming and shaming. And, in the second treatment center, I think, was also not an overall great experience from like learning about alcoholism or learning tools to deal with relapse point of view, but it sort of taught me that things, can always get worse because I met a lot of people who were in worse straits than I was, which I kind of didn't feel like was possible before I went in there. So it was a lot of stuff. I mean, I think that one of the downsides of, certain AA meetings can be that you feel ashamed if you relapse. And I've certainly felt that, when people kind of talk about, oh, if you go out there, you don't have another drunk in you. I mean, I think if you go out there and relapse, you should never feel ashamed to come back because relapse is part of the condition of alcoholism. I mean, it's a relapsing disease.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so I think I also just learned to get away from shame about it.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason I wrote the book was to talk about relapse because I think there's a lot of people that are fortunate enough to go to treatment, come out, not relapse, but I think a lot more are like you and me. I mean, I relapsed almost immediately upon leaving my first treatment center, and my second actually too. Although I got sober pretty quick after that. A few more terrible things happened, and then I decided I was done. But it just took what it took. I mean, it took years of trying. And I first started trying to get sober in 2008, got sober in 2014. So, that was the 6 years that it took for me to actually do it. And, it would be nice if it had happened sooner. I probably, would have fewer wrinkles and better health. But, it took what it took. And and if it happens again, because nothing is guaranteed, I hope I will, take the lessons I learned from that experience and come back again.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think about, okay, so since 2011, when I got sober, okay, I maybe haven't relapsed with alcohol or a mind or mood altering drug, but I'll tell you what, I am the queen of emotional relapse. And I mean, I think that that's one of the interesting things too about alcoholism, right? Is that until you really start getting involved in, doing these things, going to treatment centers, finding out more about the disease, maybe going to meetings or reading quit lit books or anything like that, um, it's this kind of thought that, like, well, if you just stop drinking, then all your problems will be solved. And I think for me personally, I mean, I had no idea that my drinking was it was just a symptom of all this other stuff, right? And I still have some of those things. I don't deal with resentments very healthily sometimes. I still will hear someone say something to me that's not at all what they said, but I'll twist the content inside my head and think that they're trying to say something negative or, be critical of me. And that's not at all what they said. So I still feel like I have a long way to go on the whole concept of emotional sobriety, or as a direct result of just like living life, right? And getting fatigued and just being, kind of not my best self, or my spiritual practice isn't going great, or whatever the reason is. I can just react really poorly to something. And I find that, like, I pay the price. So same as when I used to drink and get hungover, right? It's like the same thing. The next day I'll be like, man, I just really feel bruised,
Mm-hmm.
like emotionally bruised. So I think relapse is so interesting because there's like the physical relapse and then the whole emotional side of the whole thing, and learning to just live as a member of society who's contributing positively, right? And yeah, it's one of my struggles for sure. I'm just curious, what are some of your tools that you've picked up along the way to keep you kind of emotionally sober?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, I relate to that very much. And I would say as you were saying that, I was just kind of writing down like self-criticism. That's mine. And like I am, my lack of emotional sobriety manifests in like I just think I am screwing up everything all the time, when I'm not, when I mean that is my tendency, right? And to just sort of catastrophize and think,
Yes.
people are thinking the worst of me, or if this person doesn't call me back, like it means that like my career is over, just
Yes.
ridiculous stuff like that. I love cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm-hmm.
um and for so many reasons. I mean, one of which is that you don't have to go forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like a weekly thing for the rest of your life. It is tools that you can use and get refreshers on if you need them by going back. But it's like talking back to your negative thoughts, following the
Yes.
train of your thoughts down the like, well, what's the worst that can happen path, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing like, okay, how, sort of recognizing how unrealistic your thoughts are sometimes. Um, I think, and I may say this in the book, but I think that AA is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy done by non-professionals in a very disorganized manner.
Yes.
Because like a lot of the tools are taken straight out of the cognitive behavioral therapy, workbook. And it's, a lot of writing stuff down and sort of seeing what your thought processes look like. And that's one of the things that I also learned in rehab that was really helpful, is kind of I can't remember what it was called. It was something emotional therapy. But it's the same thing. It's just like examining your thoughts because your thoughts produce your feelings and you can change your thoughts, which changes the way you feel. And like to me, that has been, I mean, honestly, like such a huge, huge part of being able to deal with the stuff that was behind the addiction because, we use drugs and alcohol for reasons.
Mm.
And I think that, most of us are self-medicating something. I mean, sure, there are normies, like my partner who can drink half a beer and get bored or whatever,
Yeah.
or get tired. But for those of us who become, dependent on substances, I mean, we're doing it for a reason. And so we still have to address the underlying reason that we were using that substance even after we quit using it.
Mm.
And I think there are lots of great tools to do that. And and AA is one of them, and therapy is one, and cognitive behavioral therapy is just what worked for me so well. And I think it's I often sort of say I wish that everybody could have a program,
Mm.
whether that's AA or CBT or just therapy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found it immensely useful.
I love it. I love it. I love too the whole concept of there's a quote, I'm going to mess it up, so I'm not going to try. Paraphrased, what it says is something to the effect of, I'm going to take care of myself for you. And, the flip side of that would be you take care of yourself for me. And it's kind of the greater good you and the greater good me. And I love that because I think that, I love that you even briefly touched on like blame and shame because I know that's what I did pretty much my entire life before getting sober was like, oh, well, what's to blame in this situation? Like, where do I point this finger? Not for 1 second realizing that I was in charge of how I wanted to react. And that was going to be like the decision that was going to back up how I was going to feel, right? Because if I was going to slam somebody or, be super rude and come at them shaking my fist or whatever, I mean, to this day, I never feel good about that, and I live with the consequences of that. It's like, shoot, why did I choose that? Could I have made a different choice in the moment? Could I have maybe handled it in a different way or a different manner? And so I love that. I mean, I never had the tool of reframing before getting sober. I had no idea I could look at something from a different lens. I thought the way I looked at it, that was the way it was.
Yeah.
It's just such an interesting thing. Um,
Yeah, I used to love conflict, I think. And
yeah,
now, like, it's not that I'm conflict avoidant. I am straightforward with people when I disagree with them, but yeah, I try to not incite things and not overreact because one of the things that I also learned in one treatment center or another is no one can make you feel a certain way.
right.
Like, and that was like, this might seem so obvious to like, well-adjusted sober people. I don't know, but like to me, it was like, oh my God, like what? Like,
Breakthrough. Yeah,
yeah, seriously, like realizing like, oh, I am the one that, is in control of my feelings was just such a profound and look, like there's plenty of times to this day that I'm like, you made me feel that way to people who are, rude or don't understand, not coming from a place of love and understanding and all that. But yeah, just having that knowledge in my brain was like such a profound like you said, breakthrough.
absolutely. I'm wondering if you can talk about, I mean, how did you switch gears to like, hey, I'm going to write this out? How did you get the book idea or how did the opportunity come about? Or did you just wake up and say, I'm going to get this on paper in my own voice?
Well, I had sort of started noodling around with the idea of a book and about relapse. And I had titled it, I had a document that was like book project or something like that, or maybe just project. Like it was like, I want this to be as far away from being a real thing as possible, because who knows if it'll ever happen. And I just started writing almost little essays that could be parts of, a book if it ever came about. And then it's in with writing stuff, with especially long form stuff, like sometimes you're thinking about it and doing work in the back of your brain that you don't even realize you're doing. And I think that's sort of what was going on when I decided to write a proposal. And I wrote the proposal over a weekend. And it was like 35, 40 pages, and just sort of decided to start doing the work that was required. So like, I contacted friends to see about getting an agent, and then that fell into place like really, really quickly. And, I mean, it was a pretty quick process from writing the proposal to getting a deal. And I'm not saying this is typical. I think I was really lucky. But I got a great agent, got a deal, within a couple months, and then I was, off and writing the book. I had been working a job. I worked for briefly, not as a journalist, but as a communications person at a nonprofit. And that was like a great, sort of return to the world job after getting sober. But I was able to quit that job and start writing full time. And I had restarted my website. So I was kind of doing both those things at the same time. And yeah, I mean, it was a really quick process. And I wrote the book in about 6 or 9 months. And
Mm.
then, of course, it takes forever after that. You're like, great, the book's done. Like, when is it coming out? And the answer is like, in 2.5 years. So,
Ah.
and of course, it came out during COVID. So, like, book tour off. All the promotional stuff I've been planning was off. So, I mean, it came out in the middle of 2020. So it just
Oh
like
man.
right during the shutdowns. But yeah, it was, once I started writing, I couldn't stop. So we ended up actually cutting like 100 pages out of it because I turned it in way too long. So
Really?
um, yeah, it was a fun process actually of writing the book. It was hard and took a lot of time, but once I decided that I was just going to be totally honest,
Yeah.
it came pretty easily.
Yeah. Isn't that true? I love that. Yeah, just when I mean, it's like, okay, forget it. I'm just gonna bare my soul. I'm gonna tell it all, you know? So
Yeah.
good. And that's how people relate, right? What was your writing process like at that time? I love that it came quickly, because that's the beauty of like, once you get on the roll of telling your story in a genuine manner, it's like, okay, boom. But did you have specific times a day that you wrote? Did you just kind of come and go from it when you felt like it? Did you have a real strict routine?
I mean, it was kind of a combination. I was, mostly sort of working on the website in the mornings, and I do better creative work later in the day. So I would work on it, in the afternoons and the evenings. I had a friend, I was living alone at the time, and even so, it was good to get out of Seattle for a little bit. So I had a friend who loaned me his house very generously out on Orcas Island. And so I would go out to this lovely house that, overlooked the water, and just write like pretty much all day for a couple of 2 week stretches, which was really, really helpful. But yeah, I mean, I basically just decided to be, disciplined, but not full time writing on it, because I think that I would have hit a wall. And once I hit walls, I would stop. And
Mm.
I also did that thing that, that every successful writer from, Anne Lamott to, I don't know who else, but I mean, this is very common advice, which is just, even if you don't have anything to say, write.
Mm-hmm.
Because of course you have something to say. You just have to get over that block. I mean, it's not a, I try not to be too precious about writing, and I try to be okay with writing something that is like objectively bad and that I will completely rewrite, because at least it's getting ideas down on paper that I can then, nothing's final, so you can go back to it. And so, I mean, I do that with my regular writing, for which is basically daily. And if it's not perfect, you can fix it. And if there's stuff in there that, I end up thinking, yeah, I probably shouldn't say that, I can fix it. Or fortunately, I had a great editor too, who,
Mm.
as I said, like cut a bunch of stuff, reorganized the book, made it, make a lot more sense than it made when I turned it in. Because I had sort of a, a a scheme for laying out the chapters that didn't quite work, and so we ended up doing it in a more conventional kind of chronological way, and I think that that really helped too. So
Mhm.
if you have a good editor, that's you always need a second pair of eyes on things, at least, and ideally a second and a third and a fourth.
Mhm. It's so true. I think in our minds sometimes because we're the ones who experienced it, right? And we're like, get it out on paper, get it all there. And, sometimes, especially I would think with memoir writing, and has been my experience too, is like my editor would go, so whatever happened with this person? And there were like so many loose threads that I had just totally not tied up yet, and sort of realized, okay, maybe this puzzle piece doesn't really fit here, maybe it goes somewhere else, or maybe this doesn't belong, this is for some other project or whatever. And you're so right, just having that other set of eyes to just kind of look at it from a different perspective, because when we lived it, it's through our lens. It's hard to get to that point where you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes and then read your stuff. And yeah, I
Yeah,
get.
I mean, my editor had me like, I mean, literally cutting entire people. And like, I remember there was one person who I felt kind of bad because I sent them an early version of the book to read. And then that person ended up getting cut because he was, I mean, I told him, I was like, I'm
Oh,
sorry, you're redundant. And
oh
because
my
it was
gosh.
because it was like there's so many people in our lives that sort of illustrate a point, and that point had been illustrated by somebody else, and so he
Totally.
got cut.
Yeah.
uh and like I don't take that stuff personally. As a writer, I've worked with a lot of editors, and so it's like, okay, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
But I also think, to your point about like leaving stuff out for another project, I mean, the original sort of plan, my original plan in my mind was to like write every chapter in a way that related to a certain aspect of like the treatment industry, or my own experience of going through all those like modalities of recovery and sobriety, and that ended up sort of getting condensed into the last chapter or two. And there is a ton more I have to say about the treatment industry that didn't really make it into the book, that I think, would be a part of, potentially a future project or a different project, that, that the cuts were the right cuts to make. And it does make the book a lot less confusing. But there's a lot more that, is kind of on the cutting room floor that I'd like to say in some other context. And have been writing about as a journalist, as well.
Sure. Well, okay, so you could not have possibly set that up any better for the last question I have for you, which is, do you have any future projects coming? What can we look forward to?
I don't want to commit to anything
Sure.
on the
Yeah, I
record,
get that.
because I'm like, I don't know. Like, I like to be wishy-washy about stuff until
Sure.
it happens. You know what I mean? There's definitely, I have a lot, like, as I said, I have a lot of thoughts about sort of how the treatment industry works and doesn't work, that I would like to, continue thinking about and writing about, because I think that people are, will always be looking for solutions to addiction. And I think that the treatment industry often has offered a lot of false hope. I know that it offered a lot of false hope to me. Um, Thinking that, I would go in, it would be like a car wash, and I would come out on the other side.
Yeah.
And I think we have a lot of policy solutions that make that assumption too, about, some of the things I write about, are homelessness and addiction, to other drugs like fentanyl. And I think there's a lot of hope that we place in these treatment systems that are not really set up to do what we expect. So that's something I am going to continue writing about. And as far as future books, TBD, we'll see. I mean, it was
TBD.
a very time-consuming process, and I'm pretty full-time now with podcasts and my website and other writing that I do. But yeah, we'll see. I
That
may
is,
have another one in me.
I love it. I, for one, honestly would love to read that. I think that is such a wonderful topic. And if nothing else, just to chat about on a future podcast episode sometime. It's just a big deal. So I love, the fact that you would be willing to even kind of talk about that industry, because it's a huge, huge thing. And yeah, I appreciate that. So we'll see what comes next. But Erica, I cannot tell you, my heart right now is just like filled with so much joy. I just really appreciate your time and your coming on and talking about all this. You're just like, you're so down to earth. You're such an inspiration. And what a pleasure it's been to meet you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Totally, for sure. One last little thing I have to ask you. This is just because I gotta know. Are you like Seattle grunge 90s, or would you say you're more of like an 80s kind of pop girl? I mean, this is the most important question of the whole interview.
Oh, totally, totally. Well, okay, I'm not from Seattle. I'm from Texas,
Oh, right.
but
Okay.
yeah, but I am like I went to college in the 90s in Austin, so I guess probably more the former
Sure.
Seattle grunge 90s than 80s. I was a kid in the 80s. I was born in 77. So, yeah, definitely more of a 90s kid.
I love it so much. Okay, good. What was your favorite TV show in the 90s?
Oh my gosh. Well, there wasn't a whole lot on in the 90s compared to now, but I guess The Simpsons, because I'm rewatching it now and it still holds up, at least those first 8 or 9 seasons.
It's so true. And it was so funny for adults. Like as a kid, I mean, that's something, a lot of the humor kind of went over my head, but now I think it's so funny. I'm just like, man, they were clever with their writing.
Same, yeah.
I love it. Okay, Erica C. Barnett, thank you so much for coming on. And where can people find you, follow you, and all that good stuff?
I am Erica C. Barnett on all platforms. Erica with a C and Barnett with 2 T's.
I love it. Erica, thank you for your time. And for those who are listening, don't forget, be kind, rewind. Thank you for the honor of your time. Take what you like and leave the rest behind.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. You can keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.